So let's get started. First, let's start with the basics. So let's talk about metrics. First, there are quantitative metrics. These are the metrics that we count as countable, measurable data, usually of what happened, right? And then we have qualitative data, which is observation-based, descriptive data, and usually of why it happened. So a lot of companies and businesses rely on quantitative data, right? And I think a majority of you raised your hand about using analytics on your product. And you look at metrics like this: bounce rate, how many people are coming to your site and leaving right away, how many pages are they visiting in a session, how many sessions are you seeing, what's the page speed? So you see that the faster the page, the more people actually stay on it. But when you look at qualitative, we saw a lot less few people raising their hand. And this is where I want to focus, help you with the qualitative side. Because when you don't have qualitative data, you start having to guess. You guess around what you're trying to do. For example, you saw some metrics, and now you're trying to guess. Everyone on the team and sitting at a round table is like, well, maybe we should make the button blue. Maybe yellow, because I saw yellow is trending this year, right? And you end up just guessing and not knowing why your product is moving in a particular direction. Or the worst thing could happen. You get a hippo. Anybody know what a hippo is? Yeah? Exactly. For people that couldn't hear, highest paid person's opinion, right? That's the worst thing, right? We do not want to hear those people's opinions. They do not know what the product is, really. So we really want to be data-driven. So let's take an example. Let's say this is your website. It's beautiful. You added some new content. Maybe you changed the style a little bit. And maybe you did an A/B test, or maybe you just waited 2 weeks after you ran your changes to see what your metrics look like. And you see metrics like this, right? This is where we don't want the hippo to look at these and say, oh, I don't think blue is good, we should go with green this time, right? Ideally, if you could actually see what's happening, how your users are interacting with the site. Maybe there was an actual unintentional error where there was a pop-up where they had to accept cookies, but for some reason the accept cookie button doesn't work, right? And this is not something you would capture if you just look at quantitative data, right? You'll see those metrics like you see on the left, but you don't know why that happened. And that's what we're trying to help with behavioral analytics, right? In a nutshell, traffic analytics gives you a general sense of the average experience, while behavioral analytics is trying to help you identify motivations and interactions of people who engage in a meaningful way with your website. And you can learn a lot from that, right? And we're all, everyone here is marketers or do different parts of marketing here. So let's think about what's on top of your mind, right? No matter if you're working on one type of marketing or the other, there's 3 things you really care about. How do I drive more sales, more signups, increase my revenue, different aspects, but you're all trying to increase some metric and KPI. Then the second thing you're focused on is how do I drive more ad conversions? Or how do I drive more social campaign conversions, right? You're spending all this time and money creating the best ads, creating the best content, but then if you tell your users to come to this landing page and that landing page is not very good, well, that money is pretty much flushed down the toilet, right? And then the third is you want to make your product appealing. Nobody wants to have an ugly product, right? And you want to really understand what makes sense in your products, where customers are frustrated about your products. So my goal is to help you understand how behavioral analytics can help you, right? And for folks that don't know what behavioral analytics are, the first thing to talk about is the tool set you have with behavioral analytics. The first is session replays. So session replay is an ability to replay a user's session and watch what they actually did, right? And this is in a way that's privacy-centric, privacy-focused, not something creepy, but really following the user's digital shoes and seeing where they got frustrated, where they found success. And then heat maps are a way to see aggregate data, right? And this is another visual tool, right? I'm a visual person. I like visual analytics, and heat maps is one of my favorites because it gives me, across all my users that come to my site, what are they clicking on? How far are they scrolling? And then finally, we have some behavioral specific user experience metrics, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. But the best way to learn about behavioral analytics is actually see some examples. So let's go through a couple examples. So the first one is by this company called Travel Boom. They are an agency that focuses on the travel sector, and they manage Myrtle Beach Golf Trip's website. And their main goal as an agency is to drive more conversions. And the way they drive conversions is having users click the Buy Now button, I think it is Shop Now button, not Buy Now button. But as you can see with this heat map, so what we call this is a scroll heat map. You see how far people are actually scrolling down on the page. The redder the page, the part that users see more often, the bluer and purple the page, the less often people see. So you can see the Shop Now button is actually visible to less than 50% of their users, right? That's something super easy to understand. And if you look at where the average fold is, for folks that don't know average fold, it's basically when you load a website, before you scroll, what part of the site could you see? Well, the Shop Now button is below the fold. So you can imagine this is not rocket science. All they did was they ran a couple A/B experiments to see where they could move the Shop Now button to drive more engagement. And they immediately saw a 30% increase in conversions, right? And this is not magic or science or rocket science, right? It's very intuitive, and that's what I love about behavioral analytics. Once you see it, you really get it, right? Because you can really empathize with your users. Another example is Pearly. Pearly is a bubble tea kit. I love bubble teas. That's why I use this example. But they launched in the pandemic, and all their sales is through online. And they looked at the click heat map. So click heat map is pretty much like other heat maps, but it's looking at where people are actually clicking on the page. And they saw more people were clicking on Learn More than Add to Cart. So that was surprising. Why are people clicking Learn More? Clearly, they didn't do a good enough job explaining what the product is, and that's why they're clicking Learn More. So what they did was they looked at session recordings of where people clicked Learn More and see what they did next. And they found out it's because people didn't know what a bubble tea kit was. How do you use it, right? It's a new age product, so how do you use a bubble tea kit? And this is where their content person comes in with an amazing idea of creating a simple GIF, shows how to use the product in 3 minutes. So they put this on their homepage before they ask people to buy the product, and they immediately saw a 35% increase in conversions, right? Again, these are simple things you can just understand by looking at a heat map, right? Another example is with ProProfs. So ProProfs is a cloud-based SaaS company that offers products like help desk. And their main goal was to understand how do they get more users to sign up and start using the product. So they created a fancy funnel and looked at all stages of the funnel. And they found out that sign up was where they were dropping off people. Even after sign up, people were staying on and using the product, but sign up is where they're dropping off. So they spent time looking at heat maps, session recordings, and saw why people were dropping off in kind of the sign-up page. They realized it was a little bit cumbersome, not completely clear. So they ended up actually, what you might think counterintuitive, is actually broke it down into 3 smaller sections of a sign-up page. And that actually increased monthly sign-ups by 27% and 70% increase in end-to-end conversion as well. And some of these things you have to be data-driven and understand where your customers are getting frustrated. And that's where looking at heat maps and session recordings together kind of get you there. Another great example, and especially for content folks, is Hello Prenup. So some of you might have heard of this company. They were on Shark Tank. So it's a company that helps young couples create a prenup without a lawyer involved. So you can imagine how complicated such a topic is. Right? So they really wanted to understand what's challenging for their users and how do they make their experience more simple, because not everyone's a legal expert. So they looked at session recordings, and then they found things like dead clicks, where people were clicking on aspects of their experience where they weren't intended to. So for example, they had a title there or a question, and they asked you to fill it in right below, but users thought they need to fill it in that little underscore part where you tried to write in, right? Or they looked at how people were reading their content, right? And they saw people would move their mouse over and over in some sections of their pages. And that's because people found that part of the page too legalese, too hard to understand. So they had to keep reading it over and over multiple times. So they looked at these kinds of changes and made changes to their website. And they saw about 32% increase in month-over-month revenue. Right? And these are things, again, where behavioral analytics and qualitative data kind of can't be replaced with quantitative data.